All right, so for this morning's class, I thought we would look at another part of John chapter 1 to show you the intentionality with which John is writing. So just like I suggested in the meditation that John presenting things differently than the other gospel writers about John the Baptist and what he knew or didn't know is very intentional. It's not like, oh, I got my facts wrong. Nothing like that. He's got a purpose. I want you to see something hidden, kind of embedded in John chapter 1 that you might have kind of noticed, but you might not have noticed. So, it begins with our reading today in verse 29. The next day. Right? The next day. So, we're on day number 2. Right? Well, day number 1 was kind of implied to be the baptism day, but it's also kind of referring to the leaders asking him, who are you? The next day. Verse 29. Verse 35, again the next day. Now we're on day number 3, right? So 35, and again the next day, John was standing with 2 of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." He repeats what we had in today's reading for the meditation. Repeats that, "Behold the Lamb of God." And so these 2 disciples, they come to Jesus. Where are you staying? In verse 38, he says to them, "Come and you will see." Which then we take as a kind of a metaphorical thing for sure. Come and see. It's something you have to witness. But now we get down to verse 43. The next day. Now we're on day number 4. Okay, so now the next day, this is day number 4, if we started counting with like either the baptism or the reference to the leaders asking, "What are you doing, John?" So now we're on day 4. Now's the interaction with Philip, Andrew, Peter, Nathaniel, that whole interaction. Nathaniel's a bit skeptical. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? I mean, that's not a reputable part of Israel. That's kind of upcountry where a bunch of hicks hang out. You're telling me that the Messiah is coming from there? And, of course, what's he told? Well, come and see. Kind of the same thing. Come and see. So the second time John's saying, come and see. You just got to witness it for yourself. Right? Then you get down to chapter 2, verse 1. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Why is John counting days? Yeah. And what day are we up to? He doesn't mean on the 3rd day from when he started counting, because he's already counted 4 days. On the 3rd day of chapter 2 is on the 3rd day after the 4th day. Right?
Just FYI, in this version it says 2 days later.
Well, yeah, well.
No likey.
No.
They're trying to.
On the 3rd day. So what day are we on? If we counted up to 4th, and on the 3rd day after that, we're on the 7th day.
Well, what are we counting days down to? Doomsday?
Yeah, well, could be. But how did the chapter start?
Number 2? In the beginning.
In the beginning was the Word. What does he invoke? Genesis. What does he count up for us? 7 days. And then what happens? There's a wedding. And what happens at the wedding?
Miracle.
A miracle. The first sign.
The first.
And it's new wine. Right? It's new wine. What's John saying? See, this is where John is like so intricate. John is so intentional. John is so planning this out. Nothing's random. Everything's symbolic. Everything has got a hidden sense to it.
So would you say John is like a fortune teller?
In some ways, yeah,
That's what I thought.
he's a crafty teacher.
That's what I thought you'd say.
So he starts off in the beginning. Think of Genesis. Then he counts you up 7 days, and we've got the beginning of new creation. He's presenting Jesus as starting the new creation, and it starts with, we're going to turn water into wine. Right? He's trying to get us to see how he's making these allusions. Are you following it? Otherwise, why they keep saying this day, then finally on the third day? Because he wants us to get to 7, and now we're going to start. We're going to start a new creation, and Jesus is going to begin his new creation on the next, kind of the 8th day idea. So John's baking these ideas into how he's telling his gospel. That's why he's so different than the other gospel writers who tend to relate events. Jesus went here and did this. John is like, I'm going to be so metaphorical. I'm going to be so rich in making allusions to the Old Testament. It kind of sounds like John's Revelation. You read Revelation and you see, well, there's a lot of illustrations, a lot of Old Testament references. John's gospel is not really any different. You can see why it's the same writer. Yeah.
So he mentions so many of those. He mentions light, water. He mentions many of those things are referential to the things that happen.
Right. Yeah, it's not that the 7 days parallel exactly the days of creation, but yeah, he's making those allusions. Even turning the water into wine, creation begins in the beginning, and the Spirit of God is over the waters. Right? And so John says, in the first miracle of the new creation is now Jesus with the waters, creating wine, not bringing forth dry land. But yeah, the parallels are there about light.
Dove, you've got animal, you've got man, there's just many.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. He wants us to be thinking Genesis, but he's wanting to say Jesus is the one who is bringing about the new creation. And so you count through the days, and then he launches his works at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, right? So, yeah, that's what he's telling us. That's what he's getting at.
I never noticed that before.
Yeah, well, good. Well,
I guess you can't.
I'm hoping I'm bringing up something that you go, oh, well, that's interesting, right?
Yeah, even the light, that there be light. Light coming into the world.
Yeah. So yeah, if you include the prologue, in the beginning was the Word, and he's the light, and the light was the life of men. So it's like all of chapter 1 alludes to the creation narrative. But now it's retold in a Jesus way. That Jesus in his life is like kind of redoing that creation narrative. But the point would be is the real creation starts when you get to the end of that week. That's the point that John's making, is the real creation starts when that creation of the heavens and earth is over. Now comes the new creation, when Jesus turns water into wine. Now things are being restored. Things are being transformed. And so he wants to set the ministry of Jesus as a new creation. All right. I don't know. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I am so confused right now. My brain's still saying John 3:16, because, as you said, in 7 days, the 7th day is rest.
Right.
How do
Right.
you break this down by like old creation and new creation?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get it. It's just, yeah.
Okay. And there's another. Well, this is it's he's drawing a parallel. So here's the thing: how similar his gospel is to his other volume, Revelation. Revelation culminates with a wedding, right?
Right.
Here comes the New Jerusalem descending out of heaven, the bride prepared for her bridegroom, for the Lamb. So Revelation culminates in a wedding. The Gospel of John starts with a wedding, and the groom is there, Jesus, but the bride is not there.
Then who's the bride?
The church.
So,
The bride of Christ is the church. So the way John Baer puts it, he says, the Gospel of John is about the preparation of the groom. Revelation is about the preparation of the bride. That's why Revelation ends with the wedding between the bride and the groom. Revelation is a story of how the church becomes the bride through its struggle, through its faithfulness. It becomes the bride, adorned for her husband, ready for the wedding.
What about the old jugs, the jars were the purification rites for the Jews, and turning that into wine, which we have now in,
Yeah, so that, yeah, a Eucharistic kind of a communion reference. See, if you start thinking about all the possible metaphorical ways, right? Is there something significant? And I think you're right. You've got jars for purification, full of water, for Jewish rites of purification. But now he's changing those into a new wine. And I think about Jesus saying, you can't put new wine into old wineskins. You know, he uses that analogy. I'm doing something new. You've got to put the new in the new. The new won't fit in the old. But you've got the old purification rites, the water for old style purification, which he's turning into new wine. Something new is occurring. And it's now he's the means of that new purification. It's not the old literal washings. It's now the newness of Christ himself, the one who is bringing the newness to what is old, right? He's turning those, the water jugs full of water for purification is now being transformed.
process is in. Yeah.
And I like the idea of relating it to communion, because what we're memorializing, what we're participating in the bread and the cup is our own purification. I mean, that's what we're acknowledging. That's what we're doing, is we're acknowledging we have been made pure, sanctified, worthy to partake of this holy meal. Right? It's the body and blood of Christ which has purified us. So there's something about the things that John is getting at. So I spoke, a week ago about the Word became flesh. In verse 14 could be a reference to he became the bread of life, and then he creates the new wine. So you've got these allusions to communion. He became the bread, he creates the new wine. That's what John's telling his church, right? This is our participation in what God is doing, in what Christ has done.
Okay, this is going to sound a little bit out of context, but wouldn't you say, going back to the whole wedding thing, wouldn't you say, I feel like I should not say it, but I'm just going to call it out and say it. Wouldn't you say Jesus married the church at a real young age?
Yeah, I mean, that is the picture.
That's illegal.
Well, here's the picture. In the Old Testament, God brings Israel out of Egypt as a young maiden who he raises up in the desert to be his wife. That's the picture, right? The Old Testament prophets talk about that. So when John says, the people of God are the bride of Christ, this is not a brand new idea. Like, whoever thought of that? That's the whole Jewish sense that they were to be the wife of God. Israel was to be God's wife, and of course they were unfaithful. They were unfaithful to their husband by worshiping other gods. So this whole idea of God marrying his people, now that's a way of thinking about it, right? It's the illustration.
It's
That-
an urban way of thinking.
That's an ancient idea, which then gets recast in our New Testament Christian understanding. So now it's, okay, it's not God and Israel, it's Jesus and his bride, the church. So are you, so in Revelation chapter 21, I remember the time that I was shown this. I was taking a class from Dr. Ian Fair. Years ago, Dr. Ian Fair visited us and talked about this, because I had always been told that the end of Revelation was a picture of heaven. Revelation chapter 21. Verse 1, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, new creation, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no longer any sea, which is, metaphorically, sea is the source of evil. It's what the beast came out of. You got to be thinking science fiction here, because you got to think his images. He's not being literal. The reason the sea's gone is because the sea's where the beast came out of, and he's saying there's no longer any sea. Yeah?
He's being medical.
Exactly. Yeah. Metaphorical.
Thank you. Yes.
And then he says in verse 2, And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And he said, the New Jerusalem is not a picture of heaven, it's a picture of the church. And I thought, the gold streets are really metaphors about the church. It's not about a metaphor of some heavenly place, but it's a description of how the people of God are made by God to be not the old Jerusalem, but a new Jerusalem. And so the way it's pictured, that's why this is a wedding, right? Chapter 21 and 22, it's the wedding. The New Jerusalem is the bride of Christ. So like if you go down, he pictures this as coming from heaven, like down in verse 10 again. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. So God has prepared the bride, and here's the wedding for the son. So here's the groom waiting, and his bride is being presented to me. Right? That's the imagery. So John begins his gospel with the wedding at Cana, and he ends Revelation with the wedding between Christ and his church, his people. So part of my point is, don't think that John is kind of slapping things together without just randomly, I think I'll put this down next. This guy is, just like he is with Revelation, he is crafting carefully his imagery, his allusions to Scripture, his allusion to previous stories. It's so rich, and sometimes we miss all of that.
It seems like the more literal you are, the more impossible it is to understand the depth
Right.
of what he's talking about.
Exactly. If I'm just thinking he's relating simply literal events, and for some reason he's counting days just because it was the next day, and so he's saying that, then I'm missing why is he saying. The question to ask is, when he says something, why does he say it? Because he's got a reason, right? And so pointing that out. Now, maybe what we can spend a little bit, the rest of our time, is looking at these interactions. Verse 35 down to, the first story is in 35 to 42, and then the second one from 43 down. These interactions with the disciples, or those who will become disciples. and see what we think. Let's start in 35, back in John 1. You've kind of seen the overall idea of what's going on, or part of what he's saying. So 35. Again the next day, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked, and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and saw them following, and said to them, "What do you seek?" They said to him, "Rabbi," which translated means teacher, "where are you staying?" He said to them, "Come and you will see." So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He found first his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which translated means Christ. He brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon the son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. Okay.
It's Roman James making my head hurt.
Let's just assume that he's got some things he's alluding to in this little story. That it's about more than simply, well, this happened and that happened. He said this, he said that. There we are. What do you notice? Anything jump out in this little story?
Well, why would he give Peter a new name at this point?
Okay. Yeah, he doesn't give a kind of a reason for that at this point. That's one question.
Would they have some meaning when he said, "Behold the Lamb of God"?
Yeah. So, what would they think? There's a lot of possibilities of what they could think in the moment. They could be thinking Passover lamb. They could be thinking a sacrificial lamb, like a sin offering lamb. They could be thinking, like I mentioned earlier, the ram caught in the thicket. I mean, what are they thinking? I don't know. I mean, it could be any of those.
They're probably thinking he's nuts. He's lost his mind again.
They could be thinking maybe John didn't know what he's talking about.
In 38, they call him Rabbi. In 41, he's now Messiah. So looks like they've moved from Rabbi to Messiah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And there's what else do we see about movement? Verse 37, the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. Okay. Who's the him?
John.
That's John. They followed Jesus because they heard John speak. Then what happens?
Jesus asked him a question.
Okay. And it's kind of a strange question. I mean, a little bit, isn't it? 38, and Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, what do you see? I mean, what are you looking for? Now, they're following not because they've heard Jesus, they're following because they heard John. Jesus asked, "So what are you seeking?" Now, I think we need to hear that question for ourselves.
Permission?
Yeah, why are you following? That's a good question for anyone to be asking themselves, especially when they are following. Well, exactly why are you following? See, this isn't like come follow me. This isn't Jesus saying come follow me. In this presentation, they're already following Jesus. He hasn't invited them to come follow him. In other words, John's presenting it a little bit different. They're following because John said something. Jesus asked them, well, what are you looking for? What is it you're after? Okay, go ahead, Mark.
In 35, it said John was there with two of his disciples. Is it two of John's disciples?
Yes.
So did John have, God never?
Yes, John has disciples. just like later when he's in prison, he sends some of his disciples to ask Jesus. He had started a movement, and he had disciples, he had people who were wanting to be his apprentice and learn from him and follow this movement. And what we're seeing is before Andrew and Peter ever became disciples of Jesus, at least Andrew was one of the disciples of John. Like, he's already in on, I'm ready for a new movement. Right? He's a guy who's like, I'm already looking for something new. So what happens is some of the disciples of John then become disciples of Jesus, because John says to them, it's not me, there's one coming after me, I must decrease, he must increase. In fact, he basically says to his disciples, go follow him. He's the one. Like, I've just been preparing, getting things ready. Right? So it's again, in the other Gospels, it might be like Jesus meets these people and he says, come follow me. In this one, they're already following based on John's words, but then they get asked the question, why are you? Jesus notices them following and asks, well, what are you looking for? Which to me is kind of an existential question about our faith. What are you looking for?
You know, in a way, they don't answer it. They're basically saying, where you live. And
isn't that interesting? Yes. Yeah.
So they're asking for to spend the night or sleepover.
So
He
how?
has a big castle where all the soldiers are gathering, and this is a big deal. But they don't talk about it. So.
Yeah. So how is that? Because you're right. It doesn't seem like when he asks, well, "What do you seek?" and they say, "Well, where are you staying?" Is that all you're interested in? I mean, in a literal sense, you're just interested in where he's spending the night, or what? What does "where are you staying"? What could that mean?
I think it implies that they want him to be their rabbi, and they want to learn more about what he's doing.
Yeah. To ask where you stay is more than it's got some ongoing thing, but I also want us to think in terms of the Gospel of John. Where are you staying? Where does Jesus stay? Stay. We're not talking about a geographical location that can be found on a map. Where does Jesus stay?
In
Like a
connection
rock.
with God.
Huh?
In connection with God.
He stays in his Father's house. In my Father's house are many mansions, are many rooms. Where is Jesus the whole time? He's in his Father's house, is he not? Wherever he goes, he's in his Father's house. See, this is where we got to read John like we got to get away from thinking these are events, factual events happening. I'm not saying they didn't happen. I'm saying he wants us to read into them. So I think when they ask, where are you staying? It's like, where do you abide? Well, I abide in my Father, and my Father abides in me. Okay. That's what I want to... So what are you seeking? How to abide where you abide. That kind of making some connection? See, I think he's alluding to something beyond like, well, which house are you going to spend the night in? No, it's, where do you live? Well, this is where I live. I want to live where you live. So it could be a very good answer to the question, what are you seeking? To live wherever you're living? To be wherever you are? Because what I sense is you are somewhere that's so different from what I know. And I want to be there.
Metaphorically, can you take that further by saying being in his kingdom, which means being in the light?
Sure, you could
Walking
say
in the
that.
light.
He's walking in the light, which John is going to develop in major ways in his first letter. Yeah, see, now we're thinking, and then to Aviva's point, then they say we found the Messiah. Like, how did they switch from teacher to Messiah? It's this, I think what John's saying, it's when you start wanting to stay where he stays, that's when he moves from just being a teacher, which is not a bad thing, but now he is the promised one. Like, I want to stay where he stays. And so then Andrew runs and says to his brother Simon, we found the one, the promised one. Right?
Great. Nothing
Because
like
he's-
looking up to the future assassinator.
Huh?
Nothing like looking up to the future Jesus killer.
So when he's saying, what are you seeking?
Right.
And their answer is, where are you staying? From what you're saying, they're saying, I'm seeking to be where you are.
Yes.
Where are you coming from?
Right.
Where you come from?
Where do you abide? And that's why when I think when you go to chapter 14, he says, in my Father's house are many mansions. He says that where I am, you may be also. He tells his disciples that where I am, you may be also. He doesn't say where I will be after I go to the cross. It's where I am in the present. He hadn't even gone to the cross, but it's, I want you to be where I am, that you may be also. So I think what John's trying to say is, he was always in his Father's house. He was always in the light. He was always in unity with his Father. And what we're trying to learn is how to be where he is. Where is it that you stay? So where do you stay when things are difficult? Where do you stay when things are bizarre and where is it? What grounds you?
But Greg, he didn't really say, when they asked him where are you staying, I abide with my Father. He said, come and you will see.
Right. And isn't that interesting? Because it's the same thing he does the next time. It's always come and see. It's almost as if he can't necessarily tell them. It's like you need to experience it. But here's the invitation. It's not the invitation, come follow me. It's come and see. You see how John's changing it a little bit? He's not calling them, come follow me. They're already following him. But what is it that you want? And you've got to come and see it. Like, I got to show it to you. I can't so much just tell you about it. Okay.
So is the translation actually stay, or is the translation abide? Because abide is different than stay.
Well, verse 38. Hang on. I will use a handy little app, and I will. My guess is it can be translated a number of ways. My guess is that my using abide is I'm trying to make us think differently about what it means to stay or dwell or abide or But let me look up real quick. John 1:38, because that is a good question. Let's see.
Basically, it sounds like to me like
Where are you staying?
So it's staying.
Well, hang on. No, I'm okay. To stay. The first meaning is to place something. Under that, to sojourn, to tarry as a guest, to remain, to be kept. The part B under that, to not depart. So not the opposite. To not depart. To stay, as is not to depart. Not to leave, to continue to be present. The second major definition, to continue to be, to last, to endure, to survive, to live. The third definition, to remain as one is, to not become another or different. So it's to be constant. So again, it's a word with, like in our Oxford English dictionaries, there's multiple definitions to the word. So, but it can have that idea of to live somewhere. To me, which is tantamount to what I'm saying, abide. It's where do you live? Like, where have you taken up residence? Where is it that you have placed yourself? That's what. So we read it and think they want to know whose house he's staying at that night. Like we don't. I think he wants us to hear in these little events a more spiritual discussion going on. And in some ways he's suggesting, I think, to us the questions we ought to be asking and answering. We got to answer the question for ourselves, what is it you seek? And I hope our answer is to live with you, to stay with you. That's what I seek. And what if he says, well, I've got nowhere to lay my head, and it could be rough? Would we say, I'm still up for it? Right?
I was thinking this morning about Psalm 27, where David says, one thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. That doesn't mean live at the temple, I don't think.
No. Yeah, or in Psalm 23, he says, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. He's not talking about the temple. He understands the temple.
Relationship.
Yes, the temple, the physical temple is a physical representation of a spiritual reality. And he knows in his psalm that, well, of course, his son builds a temple, so he doesn't even have a temple. Well, it's not a tabernacle. But, yeah, for him it represents a relationship, a being in the house of God. Like in your home, whatever the home of God is, that's where I want to be.
It might be just the beginning of the idea. I think it's later in John. In that day you shall know that I am in the Father, you are in me, and I in you, about union.
Yes, exactly. And I think, I totally agree. I think that's where John's headed. And so this part about staying, I think, is that ultimately in John's gospel it becomes that idea of union. I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I in you, and I want you to share, in what I have with the Father. I am the Father, and you in me, and I in you. That kind of language. That's where he's staying, right?
I was just thinking when you're saying how much, and I'm going to use the word secularize, we secularize in our own conversation about where you go to church. It's always a location, a place, a denomination, a thing. And I'm talking about myself too, that really the appropriate answer is I just abide in him. And I'm sure that would come across really loosey-goosey.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone look, I wasn't asking that.
Anyway.
No, I love that idea. I think sometimes we ought to answer the questions the way they ought to be asked and not what people are expecting. And if it makes them puzzled a little bit, so be it. It's like, yeah, I would where do you go to church? I just abide in the Lord. And I'm like, well, whatever.
We think you're not committed.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
That means you stay home on Sunday.
Yeah, you're right. That's probably how people would interpret it, rather than, no, it's so far beyond what you're asking, right?
I think it's John, how many times does Jesus say, I'm connected to the Father, and I do what the Father says? I mean, it's all through John, every few minutes, that he's making sure you get that point.
Right.
I only do what the Father.
I only do what I see my Father doing. I only say what I hear my Father say. Yes, that idea of union is so strong in John, and I think right here in the first chapter, that's this idea of where you stay.
Yeah.
Where will you stay?
It's starting that off.
Right. And so he's saying the disciple is the one who desires to stay with the Lord, wherever that is. That's staying in the cross when it's the cross, that's staying in the blessedness when it's the your desire is to stay with Jesus. Well, where is that going to be? Well, that's wherever Jesus is at the moment, but that's where you want to stay.
But Jesus actually says a mansion. And I was kind of looking at it, whatever. I mean, it really does mean a mansion, from the Greek. The term is mansion as opposed to a hut or, in a thatched roof here. So the difference between mortal life and life in Jesus and ultimately in heaven is, my master has many, or my Lord has many mansions. So there was, I guess, for the poor, there was this visual of it's going to be a better existence than here.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Because Jesus did say mansions.
Right. It's a more glorious sort of existence. That's what he's saying is there is prepared a lavish place in my Father's place. Like in my Father's house, there are many mansions. Like there are many, and they're lavish. Like my Father is generous. His whole mission is to change everyone's idea about the Father. I think it really is. It's to change the idea, because I don't think a lot of the people in that day thought of the Father as being like the father of the prodigal. They thought the Father is a smiter if you stepped out of line. The Father is a sender, of doom and destruction on people who did wrong. Jesus is saying,
steadied the ark.
Yeah,
Boom.
So, but he's saying my Father is lavishly wanting to provide a place for you, and you don't have to fear. That's his point. Is don't be afraid. There's plenty of room for you. It's over the top, right? Okay. Well, we need to stop.